Welcome to Uncopyable Women in Sales. If you're looking for actionable insights and real-world tools to turbocharge your sales starting tomorrow, well, you're in the right place. Your host, Kay Miller, earned the affectionate nickname Muffler Mama when she sold more automotive mufflers than anyone else in the world. In this podcast, Kay will talk to another superstar woman in sales as they reveal uncopyable strategies you can use to rack up more leads, snag dream clients, and take your sales numbers through the roof. Stay tuned and get ready to make more sales and how about this? More money.
I've been really looking forward to today's guest, Lori Richardson. Lori started in B2B sales right after college, and I just learned that, like me, she was also born and raised in Seattle, where we both started our sales careers at about the same time. After 15 years in B2B sales, Lori founded the sales strategy firm Score More Sales. Lori is the founder of Women Sales Pros, the author of the book She Sells, and the host of the award-winning podcast Conversations with Women in Sales. Lori, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Kay. It's so great to be here.
I'm excited to talk to you. I've listened to your podcast, Conversations with Women in Sales, and you've had some excellent guests and lots of awesome content. I know you're a big proponent of women in sales, and I was just reading your book, She Sells. Thank you for all that you are doing for women in sales and promoting women in this industry, which is really important. We have some interesting commonalities in our background.
Yeah.
Why don't you start out and tell us a little bit about how you started, and maybe I can chime in and talk about some of the things that I did too.
Okay. Yeah, you got it. So I am born and raised in Seattle. I grew up in North Seattle, and I got my degree from Seattle College. It's called Seattle College now, when at the same time people were graduating from high school. And I got that in early childhood education. I started working as a teacher, and then I became a single mom. And once that happened, after a few years, I realized that I couldn't afford to raise a family on that income. And that's when I thought about my childhood, where I grew up working for my grandmother in Lake City, which is a part of Seattle, North Seattle. And I used to go there after middle school every day and worked for her for about 5 years. And I knew about selling. I didn't really know what it was, or she didn't call it that. I just knew how to be good with people, I think. And when technology came along, the conversations about selling technology, it was very appealing to me. And so I applied all over Seattle, and finally a company gave me an opportunity, and I started selling technology.
Was that for IBM?
No, we were like resellers of IBM. So I worked for a company called Bite Shops Northwest, and the brother of the guy that ran Bite Shops Northwest started the first computer store in California that sold the first Apple computers. So we sold Apple and IBM, and Compaq computer was really starting out back then, and all sorts of other peripherals and software in a box. Back when software was sold in a box, that's what I did.
So how was that? I'm sure it was male dominated. I don't think you said you were the only woman, right?
I wasn't. It was actually a very good experience because we were all young. We were all in our 20s. We, men and women, people were lining up to buy technology back then. And we were helping companies go from mini computers and mainframes to desktop personal computers. And Bill Gates was a new person coming up in business, and he said, computer on every desk. And that was his goal, was that there would be a computer on every desk. And so people just couldn't get enough. And I just remember working really well together with my male counterparts and the women But my second job, when I left the company I was at, the next one, they had never hired a woman in field sales. And that was a difficult situation. They did hire me after many interviews, and I closed a multi-million-dollar deal in 90 days. They liked me after that. Started to like me a little bit. But in the end, they didn't stick up for me when I needed it. And basically, I left and went to another competitor and took our big accounts with us. So yeah, it had its ups and downs, but the first role was really awesome. And it's funny because I told you that I'm going to be in Seattle coming up, and I'm actually going to meet up with some of those folks who I worked with those many years ago, which is going to be really
fun.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, and as we've talked about, coincidentally, I started out in Seattle where I still live. I know you went to the University of Washington.
Yep.
And I went to the other college, Washington State University, the rival.
A lot of my friends did.
Yeah, it was a great experience too, but it's like a lot of states, there's that rivalry there. My first job, I was the first woman ever hired. So your first company, you were not the only woman.
No.
But the second company, I am curious about how you were treated. And when I look back on that job in particular, actually, the guys were really great to me for the most part. As you said, men, I think they did enjoy having that diversity, and they really were great to me for the most part. Now, I do have some stories, as I'm sure you do. That was a different time.
Yeah, I was the head of a household. I just wanted to come in, make money, close deals, and go home. It turned out that I had some very good friends who were some of the guys that worked there. And in fact, some of them had come from the previous company we had worked together. And they just kept telling me, if you get past this VP of sales to get on, they'll support you 100%. It's just a matter of them never hiring a woman yet for sales. And so that gave me the confidence, and they were very supportive, although they also made a bigger salary than I did. And no one really even said to me, look at your salary. So I think there were some nuances, but generally they were really great guys. And then they hired a couple other women in more inside sales roles, but it never was perfect at that place for me, but it was profitable. And so I worked with big accounts, and that's where I worked when I bought my first house. And so that was a really big deal for me. So
I wanted to say that, make the point that you really did start in sales because of the money. You followed the money. You said you were a teacher. And that is a great point to make on this podcast for men and women. There, you can make a really good salary and commission when you are in sales. Yeah. And I did listen, one of your recent podcasts, you had a guest on, you can maybe remind me of his name, who talked about negotiating your salary, and that women aren't always great at doing that. Do you remember who that guest was?
Yes, he's our negotiator friend that we bring on. Let me just get his correct information.
And I can also put the link in the...
Yeah, you put the link in, but yeah, he's more around severance packages and making sure that you negotiate when you start what your severance I wish I had done that, because ultimately I was downsized because of the economy, and I had been running a big account. I worked with a big airplane company is based in Seattle. I had a multi-million-dollar account, and another rep had been brought on after I was in that account, but they wanted to take me out of it. And, if I had a decent package to either leave with, they basically wanted me to just take some new accounts and just wander away from my massive account. But I wish I would have known that, but you just don't know what you don't know when you're young. So I learned over time, but that was a big lesson, is that you can negotiate your pay, and usually women don't, and usually men do. So even when they say there's no negotiation, this is what everybody starts at, you can negotiate time off. You could say, I always take a week off at the holidays. That'd be all right. And usually before you're hired, it's usually a no-brainer. If they really want you, they'll say, oh, yeah, that'll be fine. But once you're in the role, it's a lot harder to do things like that unless they have unlimited PTO or something. So there's always things you can do. And I know women who are moms who said, I just wanted flexibility. So I didn't even try to negotiate the salary piece because I just wanted to negotiate flexibility when they probably could have done both, especially now in a world now where you can work in a hybrid manner.
The best time to negotiate, obviously, is before. That could really affect your compensation in a lot of ways.
And that was Dan Goodman from True Commish. He's helped a lot of people, especially women, to negotiate, and men too. But he's really good at helping people. He really sticks up for the employee. And it's funny how the company's tune can change over time. And they're like, oh, we never meant that. We never said that. It's really.
Yeah, it's good to have all that in mind from the beginning. So you're very clear.
Yeah.
So great advice. I know you recently wrote a book called She Sells, and you're a huge advocate of women in sales. And that book really addresses the culture that will promote women for companies. So I think it's a great book for sales leaders to read, anybody in sales, but especially people who make those decisions about bringing women on. So how would you describe the advantages, of course, for having women? And just briefly, how can that culture shift? What can people do?
Yeah, the first point is that in 2023, just about heading into 2024, women are still underrepresented at every level in B2B selling in nearly every industry, some a little less than others, but most every industry. And yet women make extremely good sales professionals and women make extremely good sales leaders. So it's a crazy situation that I have come to believe is more about the environment. It's not about women ourselves. A lot of women might not want to go into sales because they've heard negative things about it. But once they do, if they have an environment to grow and thrive and they know a career path, they can see a path ahead and they're treated fairly and paid fairly. Half of the sellers could be women, in my opinion. And maybe we'll get to that in my lifetime. I hope so.
You pointed out some of the things that women are really good at, even being sales closers, according to studies, and yet women are so underrepresented.
Yeah.
It's people like you and me and a lot of other people promoting women in sales. And we've both been in sales. I still am in sales.
Yeah.
I suppose we both are. And it's a fun job. It's a really fun job. I've loved my outside sales experience because it's got variety and challenges, and you can be responsible for how much you earn.
Right.
And it's great for people that don't want to sit behind the desk and do the same thing every day.
Yeah. And women do really well in it. That's not the only reason to hire women, but when a company hires a woman into a sales role, especially in a situation like I was, where I was single parent, head of a household, it's a game changer career and it can get someone out of poverty. We know of other stories of people who have been living in a motel, living temporarily until they got into a B2B sales role. And then when they got into technology sales, they made even more money. And when we do that for women, support their families, they support their communities, they support not just kids, parents, and they volunteer and they get on boards and they do community things. We know, and this has been known about women worldwide for many years, that investing in women is a really smart thing to do for communities, to build community. And so there's no downside to us hiring more women. And that's why I feel like it's a real conundrum, because we have everything there to be successful. It's people who are not seeing it, are not open to it. And the book that I wrote was really for people who are receptive. They want to hire more women, but they've had trouble. They want to promote women, but they leave. And that's who I wrote the book for, not to convince anyone why they should do it because they're not doing it now. It's really for the ones that are saying, I'm trying. And I get calls from male sales leaders and male executives in companies every week who are trying to do it. And they want me to recommend people that they can hire. So that's where I focus my efforts on people that really want to do it, but just don't have all the answers yet.
And you do point out a lot of specifics in your book.
Today's podcast is sponsored by the acclaimed book, Uncopyable Sales Secrets, How to Create an Unfair Advantage and Outsell Your Competition by Kay Miller. Put the secrets in this book to work, and you'll make more sales, grow your network, and become a top earner. See the show notes or go to Amazon.com and search for Uncopyable Sales Secrets to order the book right now.
How many bullet points you have in your job description? If there's too many bullet points, less likely a woman's going to apply because
Right. Yeah, you
women
said that.
don't, if they don't think they can do 100% of everything, they don't want to waste your time. It's not a lack of confidence thing. It's just more of a why bother? And so that's a difference. And if you find a female candidate that you really want and she declines, sometimes you need a second phone call and you need to bring her back in the office. And that's the extra effort that it can take sometimes. But once people do that, they see the payoff. It is a very committed, dedicated person who can do really well.
What else would you say to encourage women, especially to go into sales, be successful in sales?
One thing I was always waiting for somebody to tap me on the shoulder and say, hey, you're doing a good job. Why don't you consider this other role? Instead of me looking at my career like a path that I could take, I never did that until much later in my career. And so that's one thing I would encourage both men and women, although men are much better at it because it's more of a natural tendency to say, hey, Kay, I want your job. Tell me what I need to know to do it. Many men are comfortable saying that. A lot of women would be like, I'm not going to tell my boss that I want their job. But in fact, if you assume everyone wants to move up, it's okay to do it. It's okay to have those kinds of conversations. And I think it's really good to understand how business works. So if you're newer in sales, learn about a profit and loss statement, learn about financials that companies go through, talk to someone in finance in your company, or look online and take some seminars or webinars on how business works, because that's a big help when you can converse with your prospective customer in the same language and understand what they're talking about and what they need to succeed. So that's a couple things I would suggest.
Those are great suggestions, and I hope people take those to heart. Why don't you talk about your role now in supporting women in sales and the initiatives that you support, etc.?
Yeah. So I started a group called Women Sales Pros, and it was back in 2014. And back then there were no other women in sales groups. So we were out there and we were just working to talk up our women sales experts that we've had in a roundtable group for those number of years, plus consult and coach companies that wanted to add women to their sales team, or they want to do an offsite with the women on their team. And that's been going on. And then when I noticed during a little bit pre-pandemic and during the pandemic was there were some women in sales groups that were popping up. And so I made a decision to embrace all of those groups because I think together we're a lot stronger than competing with each other for sponsors and all that kind of stuff. So we champion all the women in sales groups. We have a newsletter that will talk up upcoming events and showcase people. I was mentioning before we started that we do posts on our blog about lists of podcasts or lists of books that are written by women about sales. And we just want to champion all those companies and be like the pipeline. So that's one of the things. And the other thing that's happening right now is we have a scholarship fund for women who are in university sales programs. There are over 200 sales programs around the country that they're either minors or majors in universities and colleges. And we decided, because of my friend Barb Giamanco had passed away, that we would do a scholarship in her name to women who apply, and the judges choose them from a big pile of applications we get every year, who are women in college and university sales programs. They can apply for $1,000 scholarship. We want to give out as many as we did a couple of years ago. And so we're a little shy. So if anybody's around and they work for a company that might be happy to do a $500, $1,000 donation, which for a big company, it's like an expense. It's not really a big deal. We just need a few of those, and that'll catch us up to be able to give out all our scholarships. So I would love to engage with anybody on that as well.
Along with your contact information, I will put information on that as well. So that will make a big difference. I actually just interviewed Dr. Jane Soika.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Have you had her on your show also?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. So she is awesome. She teaches at the University of Cincinnati and teaches a sales program, has studied gender differences between women and men in sales specifically. And here's the kicker for me. She got her doctorate at Washington State University.
That's right.
Isn't that funny? What a coincidence.
Yeah. And she teaches the only program for women, the only sales class for women in any university or college out there. So it's really interesting.
It is. She's very passionate about it. And she had some really interesting things to say about how women can get comfortable with dealing with failure and asking for what they want, negotiating, all of those skills that we need. So yes, and I think your podcast, Conversations with Women in Sales, like you said, you took it over from Barbara Giamanco. Is that how you say her name?
Yep.
Which she had that really rolling, and unfortunately she passed away. So it's great that you have continued that legacy. We were talking about that too. Just as women, what impact do we want to make on the world? And as we've talked about, a lot of times the men are really great supporters of women. I've had actually, not as much recently, but in the old days, more pushback from women that we were not good at supporting each other. It's not quite as bad as you see on The Bachelor, where all the contestants are so catty. But have you had that experience?
No. It's a question that comes up periodically because, again, our society has taught us that we should look for women fighting and not supporting each other, when in fact, I've just been around 50 incredible women who are all sales experts in our offsite. And it's nothing but support for each other. It's just incredible. And I've never had that experience by some of the things I've heard. And I've been in sales a long time. I've been in business a long time. And I've always worked well with the women that I've worked with. And I've always seen that. But I do hear there's usually a hand raised in an audience where something like that comes up. But again, I think that's societal. And I think that's what we're taught might happen. So we should be looking for it. And we can make that change too.
And that was one of my motivations for mentoring other women and supporting. Like I said, this was long ago that this happened. My first job, I was the only woman. But when I got to my second job and there were a few women, that's when I noticed it. And I was so surprised.
And you know why, though? When you think about it, Kay, it's because many of us were told only one of the women will get promoted. And so we had to rise above the rest. And again, that was a male construct and it was a male majority world. And it's not our fault if anybody picked that up. And there are women that'll say, hey, Kay, I went up the ladder on my own. You're going to have to do it too. That's another thing that I've heard about women or anyone that's not in the majority is, hey, you got to figure it out just like I did. I'm not going to help you. But generally that doesn't happen. I don't generally see that.
And even back then, it wasn't all the women. I had some great women too, especially like in HR, in customer service. All the women in the infrastructure of this company were rooting for me, and they were so great to me. And when I won Salesperson of the Year, they were so excited. So it was just at this one point where, like you said, maybe we thought we were all fighting for the one position instead of saying, no, the pie can grow instead of which piece of the pie. But I do think that's changed. And as I've asked for women to come on this podcast, the response has been so positive. Just like you want to help other women. It's just the right thing to do. And it's not just altruistic. It does help businesses. It helps companies. It helps women. It helps everybody.
Yeah.
So I think that whatever has been in the past is changing. And I think that's a really positive thing. So let's have a few closing thoughts. I know that you said you are working on a new book. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So She Sells was the first book, and it was really written about the environment, about the sales world and how it's a male majority world. The next book is called She Leads, and it's about how women ourselves can rise within organizations and what we can do. I didn't want to start with that book because a lot of times it's you need to do this and you need to do that and you need to do this, instead of understanding that, okay, we're in this crazy world. Here are the things that the people in that crazy world can help us with. And now here's some things. If we want to be even better, here are the things we can do. So that's how I've positioned it. And just like anyone in sales, there are things we can do to speak more clearly and to say less and to vary our tone and all sorts of things that don't just apply to women, but they're going to be part of this book and program.
Most successful women I've interviewed are all lifelong learners. They love to read. They love to listen to podcasts, find different ways of not only new ways of thinking, but inspiration and motivation. And you and I both know as salespeople, sales can really be hard. We all have really hard days. We have to figure out how to deal with those things. I think that the more we can learn and listen and be open to new ideas, encourage ourselves and each other, the better.
Yeah. And we're in a world where there are layoffs now, big layoffs that happened, and then just an economy that people aren't sure what's happening with world events going on. It's easy to get anxiety ridden, and it's easy to not be overly optimistic. But in sales, you've got to be your biggest cheerleader for sure, because no one else is there necessarily to cheer you on. There's no guarantees in sales. It's up to you to do it.
And even if you are a team, you're still in competition with those team members.
Yeah.
And of course, competition is good too. I think that competition is a big part of the thing that makes salespeople better.
Yeah.
You want to help people, you want to succeed, but you also want to, there's something about closing the big deals, like you said, or being the number one salesperson. I think people in sales, that's our adrenaline, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So, Lori, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really appreciate it. And I'll put the links to your podcast, your book in the show notes. So have a great day. And thanks again for being with me.
Thank you, Kay. It was definitely a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Uncopyable Women in Sales, your source for secrets you can use to make more sales. Check the show notes for links and contact information. And if you enjoyed the podcast, please spread the word by subscribing, sharing, and leaving a 5-star review. You can always learn more by going to uncopyablesales.com/podcast. Until next time, go out and supercharge your sales like a true uncopyable rock star.